It is April of 1951 in Toronto, Game 5 of the Stanley Cup between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens, series tied, overtime. The air inside Maple Leaf Gardens feels heavy, as if the city is holding a breath. Bill Barilko, a defenseman who usually stays near the blue line, drifts lower and lower toward the slot. The puck takes one wild bounce off a stick, lands in front of him for a brief moment. He leans in, snaps it past the Montreal goaltender, and the red light flashes behind the net. The building erupts. Teammates in blue and white pile on top of him on the ice. In that instant, he is no longer just a hard-working player. He is the man who has given Toronto the Stanley Cup over Montreal. A few months later, he will board a small plane and never return. Before we begin, please subscribe and turn on notifications to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. For most people, that overtime goal is the entire story. A grainy photograph, a leaping defenseman, a pile of blue and white sweaters, and the sense that destiny chose one ordinary player for an extraordinary moment. Yet behind that frozen image was a young man who had already lifted the Stanley Cup 4 times, who had fought for every shift he ever took, and who never expected to be the hero on the score sheet. He was small for a blue liner, rough around the edges, and far more familiar with hard work than with headlines. Then he vanished on a summer flight, and a new story began. One made of mystery, grief, and something that looked very much like a curse around the Toronto Maple Leafs. Long before that famous goal, he was a kid in Timmins, a mining town in northern Ontario. His parents worked long hours, and money was tight, but frozen ponds were free. After school, he would lace up worn skates and stay on the ice until darkness pushed him home, chasing a scuffed puck under street lamps and mine towers. Hockey was not a pastime. It was his way out of a life spent around the mines. Coaches noticed how he never backed away in the corners, how he finished his checks even when he was smaller than the forwards he faced. That edge took him to junior teams, then to the Hollywood Wolves in the minor professional leagues, far from the snowbanks of northern Ontario. There he shared cramped rooms, rode long buses, and played night after night. What he gained could not be counted in dollars. He learned positioning, timing, and how to survive against older, stronger men. By the spring of 1947, the Toronto Maple Leafs decided this young defenseman was ready for the National Hockey League. When he reached the National Hockey League, he did not arrive as a polished star. He came in as a hard-working right-shot defenseman, the first one into the corner and the last one to leave the front of the net. His height was ordinary, his frame was not overwhelming, but his stubborn edge filled in every gap. His backward strides were firm and direct. If a forward carried the puck wide, he would angle him toward the boards, finish the body check, then turn to find the puck again without a glance at the crowd. His style earned him the nickname Bashin' Bill, a player willing to accept pain if it meant the opponent would think twice about coming through his side of the ice. He did not look for highlight reel passes. Most nights, his job was simple: win the puck, pivot, give a short outlet to a forward, then retreat quickly to protect the slot and clear any loose pucks from danger. When he had a lane at the blue line, he sent a low, heavy shot toward the crease, the kind of shot that could deflect off sticks and skates and create chaos. The statistics never told the full story. He scored fewer goals than many teammates, but every shift carried the same promise. He would go into the corner, he would take the hit, he would get up and do it again. In a lineup full of stars, he was the one who took the work that almost no one else wanted. From the moment he pulled on a blue and white sweater, the Toronto Maple Leafs began stacking banners. In the spring of 1947, they won the Stanley Cup. They did it again in 1948. They completed the hat trick in 1949. Through all of it, the young defenseman was not the star in the headlines. He was the one clearing bodies from the slot, blocking shots with bruised legs, and taking the hard minutes when the game slowed into a grind. By the time the 1950 to 1951 season arrived, the Leafs were an experienced champion, but the league was catching up. Every goal was earned in traffic. Every series felt longer than the one before. The final. That year, against the Montreal Canadiens was so tight that the first 4 games all went to overtime. Bodies were tired, but habits built over years still held. In Game 5, with another sudden death period unfolding, he did something that went against his usual nature. Instead of hovering near the blue line, he drifted deeper, sliding into the soft space near the slot as a broken play developed. When the puck bounced free, he was there. One quick shot later, the Leafs had another cup, and a role player who had spent years in the shadows suddenly held the most dramatic goal in team history. No one knew what waited that summer. Away from the bright lights, he lived more like a working man than a celebrity. Salaries in the National Hockey League of the 1950s did not build empires. In the offseason, he went back north, closer to the mines and the forests, taking jobs that kept food on the table rather than attention on his name. For friends and family, he was not Basheen Bill. He was simply a son, a brother, a teammate who showed up when something needed fixing. Teammates remembered how he carried himself in the room. He did not talk over veterans or chase cameras. He arrived early, taped his stick, checked his gear, and listened more than he spoke. When younger players came up, nervous and unsure, he sat beside them, helped them settle into routines, and made sure they understood that effort mattered more than headlines. There was a straight line between the way he played and the way he lived. He did his work, took his hits, and accepted that attention would flow to others. In a sport that often rewards noise, he built a life on something quieter. He wanted to do his job well, help his team win, and then go home. When the season ended in the spring of 1951, he carried the bruises of another long year, but also the glow of a champion. Summer in northern Ontario promised quiet lakes and cold water instead of bright lights and crowded arenas. A friend invited him on a fishing trip deep into the bush, the kind of getaway that felt natural to someone who had grown up around mines, forests, and frozen ponds. The plan was simple. A float plane would lift off from a northern airstrip, skim across miles of trees and rock, and touch down on a remote lake where a few days of rest and fishing waited. For a player used to open ice and traffic in front of the net, the idea of still water and empty shorelines must have sounded like a gift. He agreed to go. Somewhere between takeoff and the trip home, the gift turned into a mystery. The plane never arrived where it was expected. Radio contact fell silent. When hours became days, search parties combed the bush, eyes straining for a flash of metal against the green canopy. No wreckage was found, no bodies were recovered. Canada had lost a champion, and no one could say exactly where he had fallen. When the summer search was finally called off, the Toronto Maple Leafs had to return to work without him. Training camp opened, games were played, new players pulled on the blue and white sweater, but there was an empty space where a hard-working defenseman used to sit. In the standings, the team remained competitive. They still had talent, coaching, and a proud history. What they no longer had was a way to lift the weight of not knowing where a teammate had gone. Season after season passed without another Stanley Cup. In a city that had grown used to parades, that silence in the spring became its own kind of noise. Fans remembered that the last championship had come on the night when a quiet blue liner scored in overtime, then vanished from the world a few months later. Numbers on paper said it was difficult to win in the National Hockey League, that dynasties always come to an end. Around kitchen tables and in bars, people spoke a different language. They said that the team would not win again until he was found. 11 years is a long time in any sport. For Toronto, those 11 years sat like a question that no one could quite answer, a feeling that something unfinished still hovered over the ice. In Timmins, the years without news cut deeper than any headline in Toronto. Ik handruim. His mother woke up each day not knowing if her son lay at the bottom of a lake or was somehow still alive in the bush. Brothers and sisters learned to live with a chair that stayed empty at family gatherings, with letters that would never arrive. The town that had once celebrated the local kid who made the National Hockey League now carried his absence like a shared weight. More than a decade after the plane disappeared, a survey flight finally spotted wreckage in the forest. Teams went in on foot. The story that had been a question for 11 years turned into a quiet confirmation. There was a funeral at last, a grave to visit, and a new kind of grief that comes when hope is finally laid to rest. In the years after the wreckage was found, his story slowly settled into the foundation of Toronto hockey. Wanderhoff, the Toronto Maple Leafs, raised his number 5 to the rafters, not for record-setting statistics, but for what that jersey had come to mean. It stood for the defenseman who won 4 championships, who scored in overtime when a city most needed a goal, and who never came home from a simple summer trip. The photograph of that final celebration, bodies piled on the ice, and a leaping figure in blue and white became one of the most familiar images in the history of the club. New generations who never saw him play still learn to recognize that moment. For many fans, the memory of that goal is as much a part of Toronto as streetcars and winter snow. His story reached beyond the rink as well. A Canadian rock band wrote a song that retold his rise, his disappearance, and the strange way the team and the wreckage were finally reunited. Night after night, crowds sang along, keeping his name alive in a different kind of arena. In the end, a quiet defenseman from a mining town became part of how a city tells its own story. In the end, he did not leave a mountain of records or a list of awards. One goal fixed in the memory of a city. One vanished plane that turned a summer into 11 years of questions. One number in the rafters, and one song that reminds people greatness can belong to someone who never asked for the spotlight. When fans in Toronto look back, they return to that overtime and that leap. His story asks what we value. In a sport that celebrates noise and show, how much respect do we give the people who do their job and carry the weight? If his journey moved you, share your thoughts below. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out more great hockey stories right here on the channel. Your support truly means a lot to us. Thank you for watching.